Chris Chibnall and Jodie Whittaker's era of Doctor Who began in 2018 with this very widely watched premiere, The Woman Who Fell to Earth, which kicked off Series 11 and their era as a whole. Now that era may be over and finished, but we are having one last proper revisit and run at Series 11. We're turning our eyes and ears and minds back to how it all began. And so discussing this first Series 11 episode right now is going to be myself, Neo from Australia, along with my good friends from England, Ingiga and Tyler. Now you two, did you both enjoy the opportunity to rewatch this episode? And had you seen it many times since 2018? I want to get into your thoughts about that.
I think I watched it quite a few times in 2018 because start of a new era, I felt I had to really get some good close scrutiny. But since then, I almost kind of made a pact not to revisit like much of these episodes at all, because I mean the experience of combing through them so much and just having been exposed to them so much is like, yeah, it was grim. So but for our revisit today, I went through, poked through it again, looked over all my old notes and stuff, and I don't know if I'd say I enjoyed it, but it was definitely interesting to time travel back to 2018, just how different things were.
Yeah, it was quite a bizarre experience. I hadn't watched it since the very first time it was brought, since 2018. I hadn't watched it since. I didn't rewatch it at the time. So for me to, it's like a true retrospective rewatch for me. For me to go back to that with all of the knowledge I have now of Chibnall's Doctor Who, it was a really, really kind of bizarre reframing of something that at the time felt like a completely different viewing experience. And I'm not sure that I'm quite able to do that justice in any of the notes that I've made, but it was a completely different experience for me to see this the second time round, however many years later it's been.
Yeah, I think the big difference is when we watched it in 2018, this was like the promise of a new era. This was like, this is all the new directions we can go in. It was really opening things up. And now, looking back, having had the sum of the era, it's completely done. Now we can accurately and definitively see and say, well, this did lead to here, or this did not lead to there. It's just a totally different experience to view a first episode retroactively, I think. But I want to know, back when we first saw it, what things did you or do you now like about the episode? Positives.
That's a tall order. Let me read through my notes. I might come back to you on this. Okay, actually, no, I can answer this. Because the very first note I've got is that the first thing I noticed on starting the episode, literally on pressing play, was that I'd been putting it off for a week. I've been meant to watch this all week. I put it off all week, all day, up to the point that I watched it. And I actually got a little pang of nostalgia for watching it. So that's something that, I don't know whether that's something I like about the episode, but I did get a little bit of, we're going back to 2018, we're going back to the time, we did all those podcasts, I watched, and we all spoke about it. So it was I suppose that's more of a personal thing. But I am a little bit nostalgic now for the episode, so I can kind of see, like classic Who fans who have a big thing for 5 and 6, and that's in the sort of era that most people are able to look back on and think, Jesus, what the hell was going on there? That's kind of what I got, I think.
Yeah. Gig, what do you like about the premiere?
I guess, well, maybe like is slightly the wrong word, but I think what jumped out to me is that it felt very deliberate in ways that Chibnall's later work perhaps didn't. Chib is clearly going after specific things in terms of, I guess, structuring the episode like this, laying out a setting like this, having these specific things happen, having the characters interact in the ways that they do. And the things he's trying to do with the Doctor's character, where he's trying to reset her too. I guess this whole thing about, I'm just a traveller and that sort of thing. So I think the intentionality to it is something that, even if I'm not a fan of where it was going, I can at least respect grudgingly, I guess, which is not a very good answer to that question, but it's it's as much as I can summon.
Yeah, I think it really does feel like, in Chibnall's words, just a fresh take, really. It does not just feel like another episode after Capaldi and Moffat's era of the show. It feels really different. And it's really trying to be. It looks totally different. The aspect ratio is different. The lenses are different. The whole visuals of the show are totally different. We don't even get the opening titles. It's really trying to look different. And I think it really does. Like, the big extreme wide shots of Sheffield look really gorgeous, and they don't look like how the show normally looks. All the nighttime photography also looks really distinctive. There's a whole new aesthetic, and the show feels proud, and it's like beating this drum of, look at us, we're new, we're different, this is new Doctor Who. And I like that confidence. I think that comes off well. And I like a lot of the aesthetics. I think a lot of it does look good. I really like, there's so many little shots of just small objects. Like we see the bike pedals really close up on Ryan's bike, or phones, or, you know, little things in the forest and that. It feels really like the environment is a big part of the episode. I really feel like I'm in Sheffield in this episode. It really does feel like the whole start of a new era. I like that. And I like how Yaz and Ryan are set up. I think they're promising characters the way they start here. Yaz is this, you know, good, she's learning to be a cop, and she feels, you know, she wants to rush at it, and she wants to, you know, go and be doing all more stuff already. So it makes so much sense for her to be a Doctor Who companion at the start there. And Ryan bristling against Graham. This kind of gets weird later because they kind of start making Graham nice and cuddly. And so like the tension that's making Ryan a interesting character kind of goes away. But here at the start, when Graham's just like being a dick to him, this was like an interesting character. He's, you know, a bit lost in life. He's embarrassed of his job right now when he's talking to Yaz. I think he feels like a promising character at the start. So I like how they're both set up. I like a lot of the aesthetics. And I like that it really does feel novel, and it really does feel new.
On the point of announcing its newness, you know, when I think of the very first seconds of the episode, and you compare it to where, you know, past New Who seasons have maybe opened with, I don't know, a zoom out from the planet Earth, or, you know, some alien toddling around, or not all bustling into the study. You know, and the fact that this episode starts with black screen, voiceover, you know, Ryan sort of like monologuing quite somberly, and then we got to the YouTube screen, and we're just slowly zooming in on this YouTube video of him talking to camera in a really quite solemn way. And it's, I wouldn't say it doesn't feel like an enormous hook. Like Ryan doesn't start talking about like a murder or this crazy thing, insane thing just happened to me. This changed my life forever. You know, he's just talking about, like, I guess his feelings, and it's a really different way to open the show. It's the kind of opening you might expect in like I guess, I don't know, more of a serious drama. It's an interesting choice, because I think if you're trying to hook people into a new era of Doctor Who, it's not necessarily the obvious or even the sensible way to get into it.
I think it starts out promising a big character focus. You know, in later episodes we can talk about more whether it lives up to that. But I think the first stretch of the episode, like the way it starts with Ryan there, and then the character introductions for Ryan and Yaz, which I both think are done pretty well. It really does start with all this focus on the new characters. And then, well, I think the episode ticks along pretty well at the start through their introductions and through the train attack. I think it's all pretty pacey. After the big Tangle monster attacks them and the Doctor enters, for me, the episode starts feeling a little bit limp. They get their little missions, like checking WhatsApp, and they're going and checking around different areas. And I started disengaging a bit there. What about you guys? How long did the episode keep you wrapped?
I mean, I would completely agree. Like the middle section, it starts to feel glacial, and I think it has a real problem with structure in terms of. I think. Because it's so, I guess because it's so wishy-washy in terms of what its through line actually is, it starts to busy itself with stuff like, you know, the WhatsApp or whatever. We need each character to do some menial little task, and we're trying to chase down the tentacle tangly thing. We're going to find out it killed some person. It really starts to slow down, and the thing is, that's the kind of period where in a story where, I guess, logically, you might try and spice it up with the characters kind of bouncing off each other or things like that, or I guess more of that character focus that you just mentioned, it starts off with. But that kind of drops out as well, because the characters start behaving in a really bland way too. You get Ryan and Yaz saying things to each other like, do you think she's an alien? Yeah, I think so too. It's not very riveting stuff.
Tyler, how did the new characters work for you in the episode?
I think, interestingly, I don't think Yaz has changed at all. I'm not sure whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm leaning towards a bad thing. I don't think that anything ever really happened or changed with her. I don't think that Manda Gill ever did anything particularly interesting with her. I don't think Chibnall ever did anything particularly interesting with her. Nothing really changed from start to finish. So that's a really interesting kind of concerning point. With Ryan, I think he only got worse. But I think you already kind of touched on that, where he does feel a little bit like a character who might have something, I don't know, have some characteristics about him. In this episode, and I don't know whether that ever happens again, but I don't have any recollection of that happening, and certainly not by the end of the time that he's in the show. Graham kind of the same, except to be honest, he's even stiffer than I remember him being. I had and I suppose this is from maybe the rest of the season, maybe from season 12, where he kind of like picked up and became a little bit less. I don't know. I don't even know where he was. I don't know what. It seems like nonsense to me to cast a beloved entertainer like Bradley Walsh and then give him the stuff that he was being given at that time. So my memory of Bradley Walsh actually was coloured by season 12. So yeah, what we got there was it was quite disconcerting, where he's being really kind of cruel and like borderline emotionally abusive to Ryan. There's what's that line? Oh, I bet you'll blame this on it, dyspraxia as well.
Yeah.
It's so bizarre, isn't it? Because you'd kind of expect, at least if this is how you're going to introduce this character, at least give him some kind of make it memorable to me that he works his way out of this this period where he's quite cruel and abusive to his family, but he kind of goes from doing that to literally just not again, and that's all I remember is happy-go-lucky tap dancing Bradley Walsh in series 12. So yeah, really really strange. And 13. I had something quick to say about 13 as well. Weirdly, I thought she kind of had a bit more of a character here. I don't know how you guys feel about that. I kind of thought that there was at least some sense of, maybe this was because they were sort of padding around at this stage, kind of feeling the character out. I suppose maybe that could have been it, but it did kind of feel like there was more personality, more energy. And I know that's a strange thing to say, because I know that many people say that a big thing about 13 is that she's very energetic kind of Doctor, but I don't see that. I see I see a kind of like, it always seems very forced. But in this one, it's she does actually seem to be very high energy, and everything's very high stakes. And there are actually a couple of lines that she has that did make me laugh. But I suppose we can come back to that. So yeah, as for characters, very disappointing to look back on this stuff for various reasons.
The weird thing is, before Series 11 came out, Chibnall and Matt Stevens, the other main executive producer, were talking up big emotions and big emotional character arcs and journeys for all our leads. And I feel like it's so confusing, because for Series 11, I think the biggest character arc is like the Ryan and Graham stuff. Oh, he still won't call me granddad. And, then eventually they fist bump and it takes you away. And then, they're friendly by the finale. And even here, this premiere sets the seeds for that. Like we see their tension at the start, that Graham wants Ryan to like him more. And so that makes sense. But this episode kind of has these out of character moments, like you're saying, because it feels so out of character with later Graham, where he's like really, really cruel to Ryan, inexcusably cruel to Ryan. But the episode's also saying, and he's concerned that Ryan won't call him granddad. And then the series evolves to eventually have Ryan call him granddad. But it feels so off to me, because he is being actually cruel here in a way that he isn't later on, and it's not really remarked upon later. So that's strange. Yaz's character arc is bizarre, because even with this very episode, she starts off, she's very confident, she resolves that parking dispute, she's doing a good job as a training police officer, and so she calls up wanting to do more. That makes total sense. She's itching at her station. But in this episode, when the Doctor comes around, she kind of folds back a little and she starts deferring to the Doctor a bit. And as we know from the rest of the era, that continues big time. So the arcs feel so weird, how they kind of regress from here even. And yeah, it's a very confusing premiere to me in that way, in that it sets out some character arcs, and then even in this very episode, they kind of scatter away and stop making sense, let alone how they continue in the rest of the era. Gig, what's your thoughts on all that stuff?
I loved revisiting the reactions like some of us and generally people had to the episode after it aired, and how everyone immediately noticed that Yaz was getting sidelined, and Yaz felt like she had no reason to be there because that was just so predictive of how things would unfold, because Ryan and Graham more Graham honestly got so much primacy. I think with their companions in the lead up to this episode and sort of surrounding it, there were a few mentions from Chibnall and from Piers Wenger, BBC drama commissioner, at the time, about relatability. That word came up a lot. Chib wanted it to be as relatable as possible. And I guess they were pursuing the idea of relatability as a genre unto itself, or a trait unto itself. And the problem with that is that it's meaningless. Relatability is something that emerges when you have characters with struggles, emotions that viewers can interpret and understand and see kind of the humanity behind, I guess. And so if you go out of your way to create characters with an ethos that they be quote unquote relatable, then you're not actually pursuing anything particular. You're just going to be projecting whatever you feel is normal, i.e. boring, onto those characters, instead of actually giving them real, discrete, fully fleshed out identities and journeys to go on, struggles to have. So I think that you end up with these companions who are just so, I guess, vaguely conceived, and you have little bits and pieces that don't make sense, like Graham's random abusive line to Ryan, or Yaz being supposedly super driven and motivated, and then just kind of not being so, really, just completely ceding all authority. And they just end up serving these roles of just being there to stand around, ask questions, move the plot forward with really wooden dialogue, and there's not much attention given to her whether they would have a real dynamic or what they would add to the show. I think Ryan is the closest, because Ryan is set up as kind of a bit angsty, kind of a bit sour at times, and that sometimes pops up in the ensuing season in a quite entertaining way. But it never goes any further than that. Yaz doesn't really have much in that respect, and Graham's just there to give occasional cuddly old man quips. So yeah, I think the sort of the commitment to relatability ended up with characters who aren't very relatable at all.
They feel very deliberate, like their connections, like Ryan and Yaz knowing each other from primary school, and, Grace knowing Yaz from that time as well, and Ryan and Graham's connection. Like, they feel very planned out. This is going to give us loads of dynamics. We can pair them up in all sorts of ways, and they'll all have interesting, different interactions with each other. But it's even in this very episode, that doesn't really come to pass. Like, Yaz and Ryan's first scene together is kind of interesting, even though their main discussion of the histories is clearly a reshoot from later on, where they talk about Ryan's job a bit. But even it kind of dissipates very quickly, and we know from the rest of the era that Yaz and the Doctor end up kind of getting paired more, and eventually they get some interesting stuff together. And Ryan and Graham, of course, have lots of moments together, but I feel like even for all the little connections they've drawn there, it's even in this very episode and later on, it's not really capitalized on that much. I see with the companions, when I look back on how Chibnall and Stevens were talking about them a lot, they use relatability a lot, like Gig said. They also talk a lot about accessibility and representation, and they like saying, it's embarrassing that it took this long, but we're very proud to have, a more diverse cast of companions now. And that's all great, and I think they're cast well. I think Bradley Walsh, very canny casting. That makes a lot of sense. I haven't seen Tosin in much, but Mandip Gill, I do actually think is really good when she gets meatier stuff to play. So that's great, to cast them all like that. But it's like, casting is like a promise that they're going to get interesting stuff to do. And even in this episode, I feel like we feel that fall away quickly when we start getting into the glacial middle, and then towards the ending where they start acting as the response devices a little bit to the Doctor. Yeah. So all this focus on, bringing different ages, different races, different genders to the main cast of the show, I think is great. But, what you hope there is the greatness isn't just that we have these people on the payroll. We're hoping the greatness is they all get interesting stuff to do and to play. And I don't really feel that in this episode much, let alone the era.
Also on the relatability front, even the things that the different companions have to deal with. So Ryan has his dyspraxia, which is set up very ostentatiously, and Graham has, his struggles with cancer, which get introduced in the closing 5-ish minutes. What does Yaz have? we don't really find out anything like that until 18 or so episodes later. Yaz is, even within this first episode, she's getting a short shrift, but also at the same time, the issues that the Ryan and Graham have are kind of planted in ways that, it's hard to say to what extent they really figure into an interesting arc or premise for the characters, because Ryan gets abused for it by Graham, and then Graham, he gets a whole monologue at the end after Grace's death, but it seems more about almost I don't want to say wallowing, but the indulging in kind of the grief and kind of the tragedy of his whole situation at the end there, rather than, I guess, really delving into it, if you see what I mean. It's all very muddy, I think is the problem.
I think a weird thing with the premiere is it doesn't really feel like a complete premiere to me, in that like the TARDIS and the titles and lots of other premiere stuff is put off to episode 2, and then the actual moment of the companions really being like, this is why we want to travel with you, is in episode 4. And I mean, it's fine to sequence out the series a little more connected like that, but talking the premiere on its own terms, it is a bit like it's not really a full story of how they all connect together, I guess, in that way. Yeah.
It begs the question of where in this episode is the hook for people to keep watching. Because the reason that premieres have all of that stuff like bunched into one episode is because they want to get people on board. They want to get people kind of excited, show off the things the show can do, the fun elements of the show. Whereas in this episode, this episode's kind of short on aesthetic pleasures. I think there's something really unappealing about it. Like not just how slow it moves, but how much it lingers on just sort of random cynical like assassinations of random passers-by, and also just like the general like a sense of like bleakness and just angst to it, and not in like a really like compelling or complex kind of angst, just sort of everything sucks angst.
That's really interesting. So this episode got 10.96 million UK viewers. That's the highest series premiere for a new Doctor ever. And, those are insane ratings for Doctor Who and, for this sort of TV in general. So loads of people watched this episode. But that, they watched that because of what led up to that, because it's the marketing and everything and Jodie's casting and all these other elements that get you to tune in to watch the first one. And the first episode is what gets you to watch or not watch the second one, and so on and so on. Trying to think, what is the hook in this episode? Tyler, what do you think is the hook in this episode? What's meant to keep people watching when they watch this one?
Yeah, I think the only work it really does towards hooking viewers in is Gig. You mentioned the fact that, oh, actually no, it might have been Neil. One of you mentioned the fact that the TARDIS isn't really made a big deal of. The companions choosing to be with the Doctor isn't really like there's no meaty stuff that you typically get in a Doctor Who premiere. And like you say, that's fine if there's something else to bolster the thing up. If there's something else that you feel is worth replacing it with. But in this episode, it kind of just it simply feels shafted. So the only thing that I can see as being a kind of premiere-like and might potentially, if I were a new viewer, draw me in, is the stuff that it does do with 13. It does, to be fair, establish the type of character that 13 is going to be. And I don't think I knew that necessarily at the time. I'm not sure how clear that was to me at the time. But certainly this time around, the 13 of The Woman Who Fell to Earth is actually a very good representation of who she's going to be for the following 3 or 4 years. So that perhaps is, that's something. But otherwise, there's not much really, is there? There's nothing juicy to the episode. There's nothing really drawing me into this particular. Like it's a fine. It's not even fine. It's an okay episode. It's certainly not the worst episode, and it's not the worst episode Chibnall did by far.
No.
But there's nothing really. It's certainly not premiere worthy. I just don't see in what world Chibnall wrote this and produced this and accepted it as working. It just completely confounds me. It only gets worse and worse. Over the course of years, my confusion towards the type of man, the type of creator that Chris Chibnall is, I'm just more and more befuddled by him. It doesn't make any sense to me, the way that he must think. And I truly don't get it. I don't know whether he's lazy and he isn't, he's reckless, he doesn't care. I don't know whether he's simply bad at doing what he does, but I don't think that's necessarily true. It's so confusing, and to go back and rewatch it is even more confusing. Actually, it didn't answer any of my questions. No,
it's especially confusing, I think, for you and me, Tyler, especially since we're both really big fans of the first 2 series of Torchwood, which he was he was basically, show running to a large extent, which had an ensemble cast as well, which, I mean, a lot of those Torchwood episodes, you'll generally get like one cast member will get shafted in an episode or whatever, but he I think generally it's handled pretty well all in there. So it's not like he's just bad at this sort of television, full stop, or anything. I've seen him do a lot of it that I like. But I guess Torchwood and Doctor Who are very different in some ways. And, one of those main ways might be what Gig was getting at there with the kind of weirdly cynical or weirdly aggressive and mortality focused the episode gets towards the end, with like the random side characters just dying awfully. Torchwood is super cynical. And maybe that plays to his and to RTD's strengths well. This era of Doctor Who, like the whole big promo run was very focused on hope. It's all super positive stuff. This is going to be super accessible. Everyone can see themselves in it. Jodie's going to play a pillar of hope for everyone. It's all this stuff about this is going to be a huge fountain of joy. And all the marketing for Series 11, I don't know if you remember all the key art, but it's these super colorful images of, Jodie and the companions, all these colors swirling around them, and there's like smiles and everything, and it just looks like, man, this is going to be the best time ever. And then you watch The Woman Who Fell to Earth, and firstly, the plot is like Predator. So it's like this evil alien coming to Earth to hunt humans, whatever, that's fine. And it's like pretty much all at night. And, there's an angry granddad, shaming his grandson's disability. It's this really grim affair. And side characters we see this sweet old granddad guard who loves his granddaughter and so happy with her, and then he's dead. This poor guy, he lost his sister, he's dead. Just people are dropping like flies left, right, and center. And the Doctor as this weird moral crisis with like the episode's kind of making fun of this Carl guy. So Carl on the train, Carl is a bit of a loser. I think the show is trying to portray him as like what the kind of condoner thing is. Yaz and Ryan are curious about the Doctor and they want to go solve the mystery, and so they go off with her. And Carl's like, nope, I just want to go. I want to go back to work or whatever. I'm not into this. And so he leaves. And then he's listening to I Am Important, I Am Special, someone wants me. Of course, the joke there is that he literally is important, special, and someone does want him, Zim Shah, because he's marked as the trophy for the ritual of the Stenza. But the episode feels weirdly malicious to me because, like, when what does he do to Zim Shah at the end?
Well, he kills him.
Yeah, he gives him the boot. Yeah.
And then what does the Doctor think about that?
You had no rights.
Yeah.
You don't have the rights.
So I just feel like this episode, like, I think there's nothing wrong at all with being super different from your marketing, especially because it's in a show like this, Chibnall obviously is the showrunner, and so he's, got oversight over everything, really. But I do like to treat marketing and actual stories as separate things. But even on its own terms, it's just a weirdly grim first episode, and I was surprised watching it. Like, I like the night shooting. I actually think it looks quite good, the episode. But yeah, it's weirdly dour for the opening of an era. And then it's not just the marketing, like the trailers and the key art and stuff, but like Chibnall's own comments, this is all about hope and accessibility and positivity. I've got nothing against cynical Doctor Who at all, but it's I think from this first episode, we're seeing these weird kind of tensions within the era of like, it's actually quite dark and it's actually quite grim. And it's weird because Chibnall seems to be selling it as something else. And so I'm curious about all the tensions there. But yeah, the episode, it's quite dour.
What speaks to that tonal disconnect, I think, is the version of the premise that Chibnall sets up in this episode, like what tantamounts to a hook, I guess, is that it's about this kind of hyperactive CBBC presenter skulking around in the most like miserable scenarios possible, and just generally just kind of being sort of impotent to do anything except like blow him up with his own DNA bombs and sort of rant about techno jargon and whatever. Meanwhile, she saves some loser guy who from like an evil alien, but he's still ruled by vices and pride at the end of the day. So was it really worth it? And, I guess within that and that whole sense of tonal disconnect and comparing it with Torchwood as well, I think what comes out is that you have this, I guess, this Doctor Who-y structure, which is nominally about happy clappy stuff like 13's character, this kind of childlike figure. And then you have, I guess, the stuff Chibnall actually does the work of writing, which is just like the kind of grim, kind of miserable, kind of bleak stuff that's not really very invested in hope or fun at all. So it's like he's sort of, rather than Torchwood, which has quite flexible structure, which lets him kind of go crazy, do shit like Cyberwoman, you have this Doctor Who structure, which he almost seems to be bristling against, but grudgingly submitting to. So you have the show revolving around this, this pillar of hope, this poppy sort of bubbly figure. but the show she is in doesn't really seem to suit her, I guess.
I think as like a hub-based show, Torchwood gets a lot of room with how it wants to maneuver its cast. Like, if Chibnall wants to write a more Yanto-focused episode, you can totally just have Tosh and Owen in the hub, just for like 2 scenes or whatever. If Yanto has to come in and, check this alien's doing what, and, Tosh can give him some info, Owen can do some snarkiness, and that's totally fine. There's not really an expectation with shows like that everyone is equally served in an episode. So that's totally fine, and I think that gives Torchwood a lot of room. If you want to do an episode just about Gwen and Jack's bizarre relationship, do it. You don't need to give Yanto lots of stuff. He can just bring the coffees in. That's totally fine, and people won't get irritated at that so much, because that's how those shows work. With Doctor Who, you can actually do that, but you can't if everyone's in the TARDIS, if everyone's an actual companion. This is why we have supporting characters that aren't in the TARDIS. This is like, if Mickey was like a Series 1 companion and then he was only like getting one line in some episodes, I think people would go, this is a bit weird. Why have you got a lead cast member traveling around with everyone and is only getting, so many lines? But he's not, is he? He's back at the Power State. And so when the show needs Jackie and Mickey, they can just do an episode that has a section in the Power State and they can use their supporting characters there. And I think the show could have done that. I think Series 11 could have done that with some characters. Like, do we need Yaz right away, necessarily? Could we have picked her up in episode 4 instead, even if we were going to make her a companion full time? Like, I feel like because they're using Sheffield as a home base, it gives them that room to kind of stick some other characters there if they're not needed all the time. But it doesn't really do that. We have Sheffield as a home base, but we also have the characters with us all the time as well. And so it's like you've got these 3 companions to serve all the time. And if you've also got the home base you have to go back to. But also, having so many companions, it's like you can't just have them do lame exposition all the time and not really have any connection to a given episode, because that's not great television and it's not really serving your cast very well. And so that's the confusing thing to me, is just, I guess maybe it's because of how much they like the actors and how much they were talking about everyone should be able to see themselves in an actor, and we've got a much more diverse cast, which is fantastic. But it's like, I don't know, it's like they kind of entered into it with, we're going to have all these big characters, and that's great. But then they even set them up pretty well. Like, I think there are hooks with Ryan and Yaz and even Graham to an extent at the start, and then they just don't really get served. I don't know. It's tricky. And it's not, we're not like just talking Series 11 here. This very episode, you see Yaz recedes super quickly. Yeah. Biting off more than he can chew with the cast, maybe? I don't know.
See, I think the kind of interplay you're describing with, say, Mickey and Jackie and stuff like that, I think Chibnall never went as far as mapping stuff like that out. He just treats the companions, especially in these first few episodes, as just this block that's kind of sucked along with the Doctor, and they become like the peanut gallery, saying things in a row, which they start doing next episode, which I won't get into that right now.
They're like a Greek chorus, I feel.
Yeah, it's like a Greek chorus, exactly like that. So yeah, I think he comes up with premises for each of them individually, but insofar as how that will actually work as television, I don't think he ever really went as far as plotting it out or thinking it through.
Yeah, I mentioned Peter Davison, the 5th Doctor Who earlier, and that sort of era. And Neo, you have a really interesting, I find quite funny take on the way that those characters bounce off each other. The 5th Doctor, Nyssa, Adric, and Tegan, when it's that TARDIS team, and it's not dissimilar. I suppose is the best. It's not similar quite, but it's not dissimilar now to that kind of. It feels like just simply a block of people in the TARDIS who don't really get on very well. I'm not sure whether that's the actor's fault. I'm not sure whether it's the writing, the way that they're not fleshed out characters or anything, but they don't actually, they seem to kind of grate on each other at times, especially 13. They seem to really get on her nerves throughout the season. And I suppose, I know we're talking about the woman who fell to earth, but it really does get to a point where you're kind of thinking, I don't think she likes these people. They're just in her house. So, yeah, it really does remind me in some cases of Nyssa, Tegan, and Adric.
Yeah, I have 2 thoughts come to mind there. One is that in that 1980s TARDIS team, sometimes what would happen is a character would get parked away. Kinder, this great 1980s Peter Davison story, just parks Nyssa in the TARDIS. Just says, we're not using you right now. We're going to use the other ones this episode. And honestly, I think that works better than keeping companions around if you can't serve them all, the best way possible. And the other thing is, like Tegan disliking the Doctor, the way that ends is played with quite a bit of intent. It's like she said, this isn't fun anymore. And it's, it's played quite seriously. It's kind of it's kind of paid off that she didn't really like the Doctor that much, or that, that time was irritable for her. But here, with Series 11, even this very episode, the tension for me is kind of that we have this kind of idolizing attitude toward the Doctor from the show, like from Chibnall and from how the show's talked about and everything, but also from the characters themselves. We see this more in episode 4, where they all kind of adore the Doctor and look up at her in the TARDIS and like, you're amazing, we want nothing more than to be with you forever. But even in this one, they're kind of impressed or intrigued by her quickly. At the same time, are they having the best time? I don't know. I guess there's all the novelty in this episode. It is an alien in Sheffield and all that. So yeah, lots to engage with in this one. But as the era bears out, sure. But that's what I like about Ryan, in Series 12. Like in Can You Hear Me, he starts saying, this kind of sucks. I'm not really enjoying this, and this isn't good for me. I'm going to peace out sooner or later. And then he does pretty soon. And that's, I like that ending well enough for him. But yeah.
You mentioned idolizing the Doctor, and I think there is a real sense of a real difference in levels of interest on Chibnall's part, just on the whole show's part. Like it seems more interested in the Doctor than the companions, and the companions end up just getting dragged along with the Doctor because the Doctor's the one who gets the speech about how I sort out fair play throughout the universe, and I'm now going to talk to the audience about how we can all change and all that stuff. And the companions are just so entranced by how wonderful she is that they don't really have much of a relationship. They just get dragged along, and they just sort of like unquestioningly just tag along with her, and that's boring to watch. It's just not exciting at all.
Yeah, my problem with that isn't any dogma of like, hey, the companion is meant to be the main character. Stephen Moffat said so. It must be so. My issue isn't at all that. I don't care if the Doctor or the companion is the main character or whatever, but this is a TV show. You have, 4 main cast members. It's just TV logic that they all should get interesting stuff to do. It's not Doctor Who brain of the companion is meant to be the main. No, the Doctor's, it's nothing like that. It's just if you've got, 2 main characters, they're actually both meant to be interesting. And they're both meant to, have interesting characterization and performances. It's nothing to do with Doctor Who dogma. It's if you have 4 leads, they're all actually meant to be interesting. And they're all meant to, have great hooks. That's just, that's the logic here.
We spoke very quickly about sorting out fair play throughout the universe, and that obviously sets up 13 as space police, which we know that with retrospect that is exactly what we get. Lo and behold, 13 is and always has been space police since the very first episode. So in some sense, that's fair enough. It's really interesting to me that I'd forgotten that she was in Yaz's police car in this episode, in the front there. And that happened again. We had echoes of that in Flux, didn't we? I can't remember exactly what episode that was in, but that happened again in like a it's all in your head kind of scene. And because I'd forgotten that this happened, I tried to map out exactly when had Doctor Who, the character, ever been in a police car before. And the only thing, maybe you guys can correct me, the only thing I could land on is the Ninth Doctor in this, I can't remember what they're called, the Aliens of London, in this Levine Downing Street episode. And he was in the back of a police car. He wasn't getting arrested, but he was getting escorted by the police into the government to a place that he didn't necessarily want to be. So he was, in a sense, the prisoner, the arrested. But here in this season, it's really interesting that you've got twice in two separate parts of this era. You've got the Doctor in the front of the police car, actually in one scene in police uniform, and she's sorting out fair play throughout the universe. So there's symbolically, I find that a really interesting thing. The Doctor's never been that before, and so that is actually something that Chibnall followed through with. The Doctor is the police.
I love what you're saying there. I think that's so interesting. This totally gets to me because, okay, on the one hand, like I was saying with the marketing, I think all episodes and films deserve to be, evaluated on their own terms. I don't think we should ever just be like, hey, the trailer promised me this and then you didn't do this, therefore, this is awful. I feel like that is kind of an incomplete way of looking at things. But I think the other way around is also incomplete, where people are like, you can't bring up the marketing. How dare you, judge it for what it is. I think they're both interesting. They're both texts. We have like The Woman Who Fell to Earth in a Vacuum is worth talking about. And then also The Woman Who Fell to Earth with all the paratext of the interviews and everything else is worth talking about too. They're both worth talking about, is the way I see things. And so for me, I brought this on myself, but Chris Chibnall, I haven't watched it in years, and I do want to rewatch it and talk about it. But Broadchurch, I remember, was a pretty well done TV show, as far as I can remember. I haven't watched it since it aired. My opinions might be different now, but I remember enjoying it when I watched it. Chibnall also showran the first 2 series of the UK Law and Order. He did those 2 TV movies of the Great Train Robbery. What I'm saying is he likes police stuff. He can write police stuff. He's written a lot of police stuff. Some of his police stuff has been super duper successful. So that's interesting. And that he's entering into the show with that. And my big thought was, we're going to finally, analyze the Doctor as police. The Doctor travels around in a police box. What does that mean? Is the Doctor a time and space cop, or are they not? The show has examined this sort of stuff before. Series 8 has the whole thing of, am I, the big god hero that Matt Smith's era flirted with and David Tennant's era flirted with? Or am I just an idiot, traveling around, a cosmic space, wacky traveler? The show has looked at those sort of ideas before, but I thought Chris Chibnall, police writer extraordinaire, and then a companion who's a police officer, we're going to get this incredible cop kino, of analyzing the Doctor as a police, this isn't his fault. This is my fault for getting so worked up, basically over, a fan fiction I was pre-writing in my head. But still, I was entering into this episode really, really hopeful about, are we going to have this, interesting cop analysis of the Doctor now? So I'm very sympathetic to you looking at the police imagery, in the episode and wondering about that. Because we never really got the interest in the police that I was hoping for, or maybe expecting from Chibnall's past work. But we do get something adjacent, which you were bringing up, Tyler, which is the rules stuff. Like when the Doctor's having a confrontation with Zim Shah on that roof and talking about the gathering coil device thing, she's saying, you're not doing the ritual of the stanza right because you're using this locating device. You've broken the rules. Some leader you're going to make, Tim Shaw, is a big blue cheat. And then later on, of course, I'm the Doctor sorting out fair play throughout the universe. And then, like we've said, she gets very annoyed at Carl for...
God knows.
Breaking the rules, supposedly killing the creature that was trying to basically kill him, put him in stasis forever, which she, remarked on being completely obscene. So what's wrong with him trying to get back at her? Okay, maybe this Doctor has a really, curious morality. Of course, we know from how the era plays out that this stays weird and inconsistent, her morality. But yeah, this episode might not set off on that police track that I was hoping for, but it does very firmly assert this Doctor really cares about the rules. She gets very angry at the villain specifically for cheating at his own cultural customs. She gets angry at people attacking something, trying to basically kill them because that's against her rules, I guess. And then she's saying, I sort out the rules. That's who I am. That's where she has her, I'm the Doctor, her identifying moment of herself. The big crescendo of the episode is I sort out fair play throughout the universe. I'm not trying to overread insane amounts of intent into the term fair play, but I'm saying with these other things in the episode, we're getting the Doctor set out as the maintainer of the rules. So I guess she kind of is doing the cop stuff I was wanting in that way.
See, now I almost wonder if Chibnall's, attraction towards figures like that is not even necessarily so much an enormous amount of commitment to the ideological status quo or anything like that, or if it could just be the fact that characters like that, characters who are, like cops who enforce status quo or rules or whatever, they can move events in a way that characters like Yaz or like Ryan and Graham don't, I guess. And maybe to a certain extent, that might almost explain the disparity in how the show treats the Doctor versus the companions, because the Doctor as this, a space cop or whatever, and who has all these tools at her disposal and can basically, who is motivated to solve these space crimes and sort out stuff like that, she can move the story in a very mechanical way. And I guess maybe that is reflected in the fact that the other characters are just sort of tagging along with her and just sort of following her around and occasionally asking her questions to move the plot along, and not really driving events themselves to any significant degree. Like maybe Chibnall really is just drawn to characters who can push the story like that because they have a rule set or a commitment to carry out. I think
in this episode it's there. It's not really an issue yet, if it ever is. But I think there's a little bit of friction between, like, I know Jodie, when she talks about what interested her in the role, she, says fizzing with energy and physicalizing, crazy amounts of energy is what really interested her. And, the whole quirkiness of the Doctor is like a big part of her performance. So we've got the hyperactive energy and crazy quirkiness, childlike quirkiness, CBBC presenter, Giggs said for it. That's all, one aspect of the performance. And then the character is all about maintaining the rules. And so it's like a very weird, is she like an exuberant school teacher? Like what is the characterization there to have all this energy and craziness, but actually be all about maintaining the law? Yeah, it's curious.
It seems to be a combination that serves to make her extremely annoying.
From a practical perspective, Gig, you've offered a good insight into perhaps why Chibnall would have wanted to do something like that in terms of storytelling. But I think ideologically, philosophically, I wonder whether I can begrudge it because, Neo, like you mentioned, I know that that's his shtick. I know that he likes police stuff. So I know that he as a man must be into the rules to some degree, must be into the rule of law, into the idea of justice. So I'm not sure whether, I don't know, can I begrudge it? Can I not? I don't know. I know that I don't like it, and I know that for Doctor Who, certainly, I don't know that it really sits well because, and also it doesn't really make much sense to me because this is a man who must have grown up with Tom Baker as Doctor Who. You know, the Stephen Moffat described him as the adrenaline junkie Doctor. He's kind of like a havoc wreaker Doctor Who, ignited a revolution, and this is the Doctor Who that Chris Chibnall sought to write. I find it disappointing, incredibly disappointing. Stripped of all of the other flaws that Chibnall Doctor Who has, my main issue, I think, with it is his perspective on who the Doctor ought to be. And I never wish this on anybody, but I do kind of wonder, had Chris Chibnall wrote another Doctor, the 14th Doctor, whether they might have been the same, or whether they might have been kind of similarly to what Stephen Moffat was able to do. Kind of write almost a foil to his previous Doctor. I wonder.
I think he kind of did because, to a small extent, not much screen time, but the Joe Martin, Doctor from Fugitive of the Judoon and, cameos in some other episodes is basically a whole new Doctor in terms of, a whole new casting, a whole new costume, and I think a whole new characterization. Whether you're a big fan of that Doctor or not, like she very clearly isn't the same personality as the 13th Doctor.
That's kind of an answer to my question, then, I suppose, isn't it? Because Joe Martin's Doctor is perhaps even more of a literal rule enforcer. She's a rule enforcer that works with an institution. I know it's just rebelling against them, but that's still her whole thing. So I suppose Chibnall's vision of Doctor Who is space police.
Yeah, the main difference with Ruth is that she doesn't have as many silly scruples as 13. So she's willing to be more violent and pragmatic, and rather than 13 and all her high ideals of beautiful morality. Perhaps the ideal Chibnall protagonist is someone like Jack Harkness and Torchwood or whoever, people who can enforce the rules and status quo or whatever without having compunctions about what they have to do.
Yeah,
who can just get stuff done.
I think the thing with Torchwood that maybe played to his strengths more is there are nominal rules, but Torchwood is it's not the government, it's not the police.
Yeah, it's separate.
Yeah, and Jack is he sings to his own tune. He makes up a lot of stuff as he goes along. He will bark at the others for not doing what he wants sometimes, but I don't think Jack has like a super codified moral rule set or anything. And part of the joy of that show is the characters are hypocrites and stuff all the time. Like, the very first episode, was it the first episode when they all hand over the stuff they've been stealing from the hub to use in their personal lives? Mm-hmm. And that continues, through the first two series. The characters all the time are doing things they shouldn't do. Tosh and Greek sparing gifts and Yanto and Cyberwoman, all through the show, they're kind of abusing their power at Torchwood. They're doing all these sorts of spikiness against whatever rules are meant to exist. And they're all pretty unsupervised at the end of the day. And that's great. That's great TV. It's so interesting to see them do all that and all that friction that comes from there. And Torchwood never really feels didactic to me. I never feel like, actually, organizations getting government money but nominally outside the government are meant to follow so-and-so rules. And these characters are all so awful for not doing that. And therefore, we got to punish them. And it's not like that at all. The show is freely dark and, kind of morally grey, which I think gives Chibnall more freedom, I guess. But here, my impression is that he wants his Doctor Who to be a big positive thing, and that's why he talks up the Pillar of Hope stuff so much. And maybe I'm going too far, but I feel like maybe he's better at not doing that. Like, even in Broadchurch, we do have more, these are the rules, because, Broadchurch is set in the real world with real police and everything. But still, we see characters break them, and we often sympathize because of, the severity of events they're going through and whatever. Like, there's more room to play around there. I guess because Broadchurch is for adults. And Doctor Who, I guess, is for everyone, ostensibly. But the morality feels more childlike to me in Chibnall's era than it does in some other eras, certainly. So I feel like almost like Chibnall is very good at some things, and he's kind of constrained himself with his vision for Doctor Who into playing to his weaknesses, almost, which is not great.
I wonder whether it's an issue with character agency, because I'm thinking about, I'm trying to compare the two Chibnall shows, Torchwood and his Torchwood and his Doctor Who, and Jack and 13 are both, in a sense, they're kind of police governors. They're like chief inspectors, and they've got their foot soldiers, and that's the other cut, the rest of the cast. And in Torchwood, similarly to Jack, 13, and she's a very different character, but similarly, she breaks her own rules, and she doesn't have clearly she has a sense of what morality ought to be for other people, but her own morality is quite wishy-washy, and that never really gets addressed in Doctor Who, but we've all spoken about it several times. And it's definitely the same thing with Jack, where he's not uncomfortable with going back and on certain things. He said, walking certain things back, doing things that he wouldn't suggest other people do. But the interesting thing in Torchwood, at least, is that when other people do bad stuff or the slightly morally grey stuff that Jack might have done, Jack will get pissy with them. But those characters have a lot of agency and a lot of likability anyway, and they're quite active characters. So when they do break Jack's rules or break the sort of rules of morality, a lot of times it's a greater good thing, and they have enough will and they have enough will and character to kind of fight back against Jack. But in Doctor Who, it kind of feels more like the school teacher thing, where they're all kind of travelling around with her, and every time they break the rules, she'll shout at them, and they kind of like walk back into the TARDIS with the tail between their legs. and that's the complete difference between his Torchwood and his Doctor Who, is that the rest of the cast in Torchwood had agency in the things they were doing, and 13 does have agency. She does. I do believe that, but the rest of the cast really don't. And it almost becomes like an abusive, really draining relationship between the Doctor and her friends.
Yeah, especially as I think less so in series 11, where we're just getting to know everyone, but as the next two series continue, especially with Yaz, the Doctor's rudeness just keeps on going, and there's a point where it just gets really sad. The show still seems to conceive of the Doctor as, a pillar of hope all the time, and she gets these adoring speeches from, Yaz and other characters so often that I feel this weird disconnect, and that I'm thinking, like, I don't think the Doctor is the hero you're trying to make the show out to be. In Torchwood, Jack isn't a hero. We know Jack is bad in lots of ways. We get that all the time. He breaks his own rules and he's done awful stuff. Like the Doctor, he's had this hugely long life, so we can expect he's done some terrible things within it. And the other characters get to pull him up on that. Like, especially Gwen gets to kind of be more of the moral center of the show, even though she does a lot of bad stuff as well. In series 1 of the show alone, she does some awful things. Some things she'd even very literally wish people would rather forget than remember. They were that awful. But the show doesn't lose sympathy, I think, with Jack or Gwen. And the show isn't didactic in the way that it's like trying to say, these people are bad for doing this, or these people are always good, because, they're the leads. Whereas his Doctor Who will sometimes complicate the Doctor by having her do unlikable things, but it seems to really stick to this track of, but the Doctor is the pillar of hope and the Doctor is all that is great, and we all love the Doctor and everything. It's a weird tension there. Yeah.
Do you think maybe this is the result of, and I'm asking this, I'm not, this is not really a point I'm making. Do you think maybe this is the result of his maybe poor understanding of children's drama compared to adult drama? Obviously, with Doctor Who being a more child-centric drama, which I don't know that Chibnall's ever done before Doctor Who. Has, so you can correct me if I'm wrong.
That's a great question. Russell T. Davies and Stephen Moffat, the first shows both of them show ran were for ostensibly for children. Press Gang for Moffat, Dark Season for Russell. They really came out of children's TV. And, Press Gang especially is super, super acclaimed for being absolutely brilliant children's TV, and very much the sort of children's TV, like Doctor Who in some areas, where it's, for kids, but it's extremely for adults in that it's so good. The characters are so well done and nuanced and believable and interesting that, the show is being made about kids and for kids in the strictest sense, but anyone can enjoy it, basically. So Moffat and Russell both honed those skills, multiple shows for Russell, very, very much. Chibnall, I do think he's good at some of the drama he's done more for adults, very much. Torchwood, obviously, the whole basis of the show is like Doctor Who for adults, Doctor Who after dark kind of thing. And so he did good with that. Broadchurch is obviously for adults. I think, a lot of his successful work is very adult focused. I do think, I don't know if he just lacks the capability to write for children very well. And I'm sure plenty of children love this episode and, love the year and all that. I don't want to validate that. But I think he has less experience and he is less of a sense of how to knit together the adult stuff he likes doing and the children stuff he wants the show to be. Whereas I think Russell and Moffat did a better job of not feeling patronizing and not like they were speaking down. I think they were very good at kind of mixing up the children and the adult stuff all together and making a kind of holistic sense of, this will work for everyone. I'm not talking down to the kids, and it's kind of scales up. If you're an adult, you're gonna conceptualize some of these relationships in more detail, but they're perfectly understandable for kids. I think they both had a better sense of how to do that. Whereas Chibnall, I feel more of a tension. Like, I think he'd be better at writing these characters in his usual way, but he seems really strict on, no, this is all about hope. I don't want to compromise morally my characters so much. And I think that's where he's playing to his weaknesses, basically, is what I think Chibnall does with his Doctor Who.
The concept that jumps out to me is incuriosity. I think that's the problem. I think Chibnall seems to almost believe that because Doctor Who is an all ages thing and it's about hope or whatever, that it should be incurious about the things that are going on within it, about the relationships, the idea of the Doctor should be like the idea that he seems to think that the Doctor should be the moral center, and that's fine, and not actually the companions or anything like that. So there's none of that Jack Gwen dynamic, for example. He just seems to be set in a way that the Doctor is the pillar of hope, as you say. And I guess that incuriosity ends up bleeding out to everything else. I think and on the topic of children's TV, I think the reason that something like Press Gang is so acclaimed is that it is curious. It's curious about these characters and their relationships, the things that are wrong with them. And I think because kids are curious, and I think everyone who likes stuff is curious, really, to some extent. So I think incuriosity is not a very good recipe for drama at all. Really, if you don't want to chase down an idea or a character, or, a character trait, a tendency, an arc, then you're going to end up with something that feels really limp and lifeless.
Yeah. Well, I think where we can go from here, talking about what the show is trying to be, is what they were comparing it to. Chibnall and the other producer, Matt Stevens, back in the day, back in 2018. I think we'll all have stuff to say here. So some good quotes are, what does Doctor Who feel like in 2018? We wanted to make the Doctor Who that felt like it stood alongside Black Mirror, Game of Thrones, the CW superhero shows. It has to sit alongside Westworld, and it has to sit alongside Stranger Things and all those things. And because the audience, and the younger audience especially, don't differentiate whether they're watching that on the big screen or on HBO or on Netflix or the BBC, it has to be up there with those guys. So Black Mirror, Game of Thrones, CW shows, that's like The Flash, Legends of Tomorrow, Green Arrow show, that kind of thing. Westworld, Stranger Things are the shows they invoked specifically.
I know it definitely sits along Stranger Things relatively well, and probably the CW shows relatively well. I can't speak for Westworld, but I have a pretty good guess.
I've only seen the season 1 of Westworld, but that was a very cerebral show. I don't see any linkage there. I guess he might just mean just in terms of like budget and production design. It has to have parity with that, and that's a super expensive show. Stranger Things, so that first season, only a season I've seen, but that first season was 2016. And so, yeah, I totally think, and I think you guys will agree with me, that Stranger Things was on the mind of Chibnall and Stevens here. I think even the choice to have the episode all at night, it's kind of going for that kind of tone or visual tone or aesthetic. I think I very much feel the Stranger Things vibe. Even the larger cast of characters, maybe you could even say, like Stranger Things has a gang, and that's the really well liked aspect of the show is that gang of young characters, and we have our gang here of the Doctor and the TARDIS team,
the fam.
Yeah, the ensemble, which is most new Who series don't really have an ensemble, or if they do, it's just a trio. But here we've got 4 characters, or 5 in The Woman Who Fell to Earth are our gang. Yeah, I don't know. Tyler, do you see a big Stranger Things element to the show?
Weirdly, certainly as Stranger Things goes on, it kind of becomes more 2018 Doctor Who. But yeah, 2018 Doctor Who was definitely doing 2016, 2017, however many seasons were out at that time. It definitely is doing a Stranger Things thing, and something that Stranger Things does, and in some cases does relatively well, in other cases kind of falls flat on. It does this thing where it will hop between several different A, B, C, D, E plots, where rather than having the group all together, apart from in usually the final couple of episodes, they will have their own individual things going on. And something I think that Chibnall, I do think he tried doing this. I think this happened more in season 12, 11, if I recall correctly, than 12, was splitting the characters up and getting them to do their own separate stuff. And obviously here you have the really weak, the really weak stuff of Ryan just scrolling on Twitter looking for stuff. Yeah, the stuff of Grace puts a message into a WhatsApp group chat. So they are doing their own individual kind of research and things. I can definitely see the way, storytelling wise and visually, like storytelling structure and visually, I can see Stranger Things in this show. Yeah, in this episode.
What interests me is what he's saying there is like the show has to have parity with all these shows. Like I know he doesn't literally want to make the show like Game of Thrones. I don't think that's what they're saying. I think they're saying, kids, hopefully kids are watching Game of Thrones, I'll tell you that. But, you'd hope they're not. Anyway, kids, teens, adults, everyone, even kids especially, but, adults as well, they're not going to be sympathetic all the time to like, hey, well, this show, I read on Wikipedia, it had a smaller budget than Westworld. So it actually makes sense that it looks a bit ropey and airy. No, people just want good TV. They're allowed to want that. They're allowed to want everything to look grand and great. I think that's fine. I don't think everyone needs to have all this context of, well, actually, it was shot on a very small budget and COVID affected everything. Therefore, you have to like the finale, even if it didn't turn out well because all these production problems. If you're a TV nerd like us, you can think about that. But there's no expectation to, I think is what Chibnall and Stevens are very aware of. And therefore, they want their show to not look like a joke next to other shows, basically. And so from there, we get the show transformed to the Netflix aspect ratio of 2:1, which is, how it looks now, a little bit less height than the regular 16:9 TV aspect ratio. So it looks like Netflix in that sense. It's using the anamorphic lenses. You can see that with all the lens flare in the episode, how they look more narrow now because of how they're like compressed together with the lenses. So that makes it look more like the movies Stranger Things is influenced by, like more like those old 80s movies, 80s sci-fi movies, kind of like that. And the CGI monsters, like of course Zim Shah is like a classic Doctor Who. It's a guy in a funny suit, but the big Tangle gathering coil monster looks good. That doesn't look, fake at all to me. That doesn't look very Doctor Who in the sense that looks fine. I think that would look fine on Stranger Things. I think that does have visual parity. And as we go on in the era, we get more of those good CGI creatures. The arachnids in Arachnids in the UK, but the arachnids in Nikola Tesla's Night of Terror. There is that kind of visual parity. And I think that's why he takes the show to South Africa a lot for the location filming. I think he's really concerned with a kid needs to not think, well, this is Doctor Who, this is cheap as chips. If a kid's flicking between stuff on iPlayer, they need to not think Doctor Who looks cheap, I think is his big concern. They can go watch Game of Thrones and then they can watch my Doctor Who and they need to not go, well, this looks shit, looking at my Doctor Who. I'm sympathetic to his concerns there. And, I'm coming from my place of TV privilege of not caring so much about that sort of thing and actually being the sort of person to go, well, actually, the last 2 episodes were affected by COVID for something, therefore, blah, blah, blah. But I see a lot of enthusiasm and, good effort into making the show have visual parity with those other shows. Does it have storytelling parity with with some of those other shows he's talking about? Are the characters as defined and as interesting as in some of those other shows he's talking about? I don't think so, and I wish more energy had gone there, I suppose.
I also think that the intention to kind of make Doctor Who almost blend in with everything else on television is not necessarily the most sensible one. I don't know. Obviously, I completely agree with everything you're just saying about how it's a completely understandable desire to have it not look cringe, quote unquote,
yeah.
compared to everything else on television. But at the same time, I think for certainly most of New Who's history up to that point, certainly the most beloved periods of New Who, the RTD era, there was no question of we've got to make the show look as fucking good and cool as possible. No, the ridiculousness of the show has to a certain extent always been a part of it, and kind of something that gave it an identity, something that made it stand out from the crowd.
Yeah.
And I guess there is not much of a sense that Chibnall and Co. and Stevens and them, they would never seem to be really talking about what makes Doctor Who actually stand out, have an interesting identity of its own, other than just being Doctor Who and something that has a built-in fan base.
Yeah. So he brings up Game of Thrones, and especially in Game of Thrones later years, a lot of what people talk about would be the spectacle. Like, those dragons looked amazing, that battle was amazing. Definitely from season 6, 7, and 8 of the show, that would be a lot of what the water cooler talk would be. That's from season 6, 7, and 8. A show doesn't get popular in season 6. What made the show popular in the first place? The first season of Game of Thrones was cutting out battles from the book instead of realizing them in all big budget glory, because it didn't have the budget to realize them. So why was anyone watching season 1? Why did people care about series 1? Because the characters are excellent. Because the show and the books had absolutely fantastic characters that people got really attached to. I think the first event that really punctured that show into mass public consciousness was a big, very gory sequence of death in Series 3. And that's not like a huge budget battle or anything. That's a very small scale in terms of what's actually going on there. But it involved characters people were really attached to. And the endings those characters met, I think, were very well done tragedy that felt very, very true to the choices they had made and the kind of moral consequences that world had set up. So Game of Thrones eventually reached that kind of mass popularity that people, are all talking about. Whoa, look at the explosions and everything, sure. But it didn't randomly get popular. It had to build up that popularity by having really well-written characters and really well-written character drama early on. Same for what other shows is he bringing up? Westworld, at least in the series one that I can think of, that show didn't get famous just because, whoa, it's the Wild West. Look at all these crazy, horses around or anything like that. It got famous because it's a really interesting concept that show is doing in the first season anyway. It's a very, very interesting idea that it's playing with in depth. And it doesn't talk down to its audience in series 1 anyway, in that it's doing quite a complicated story and it's expecting you, to keep up along with it. And then the reward is you understanding how that all resolves. So the spectacle is important, and I think visual parody with those shows is super sympathetic. But yeah, that's not the foundation. The foundation is always going to be your characters, or at least, having a really interesting premise. And we were struggling to find what the hook, what the premise of this even was. And the characters, I think, like we said, they're set up pretty well, some of them, but they kind of start receding in this very episode. And so wanting parody with all those other shows, I totally understand, but I don't feel like they're a pretty good job of in the visuals.
It wants to seem like prestige TV almost, but the content is not even remotely. Well, I mean, that's a crazy label, but the content is not on par with a lot of the prestige shows, quote unquote, that get brought up.
I have the perfect Stranger Things note that's just come to me. The issue with trying to fight against type, which is what they're trying to do here. Doctor Who budget got frozen in the recession back in the day. In Matt's first era, I believe. And so that is what it is. And the show had to get increasingly clever to try and make it not look cheap as chips. Of course, it looks cheaper, or it did look cheaper than other stuff on television, but they had to get very creative. Everyone talks about Series 5, wow, the budget increase. What budget increase? Moffat just spent his money differently. There was no budget increase. Not at all for Series 5. Moffat wanted it to look different, the same way Chibnall wanted it to look different. And, that involved talking with directors and DPs and everyone in the tone meetings and all this to define how the show was going to look now and how it was going to do HD differently than RTD was doing at the tail end. So it's not just a question of resources. It's that if you start trying to make your show be like other shows, you're going to be running uphill or running up that hill is what just came to me. Because then you're trying to be something you're not. And so you're always going to be fighting what you are. Basically, if Chibnall wants to be like Stranger Things, that's all well and good, but that's hard. You have to constantly, go against what Doctor Who has at least these 10 years of history, with BBC Wales, and even longer history if you want to go back to what he grew up with. You have to kind of fight against that to kind of morph your show into something else, which is doable. And I admire the kind of ambition of that. But is it even the wisest choice? Like you're saying, people remember the David Tennant era of Doctor Who better than everything else. Like it or not, as we can see so much from choices being made for 2023, people remember and love David Tennant's era more than everything else. And like Gig was saying, that era looks very low budget at times. And it doesn't matter because people fall in love with the tone of it, with the supporting cast, with the Tennant's Doctor himself. David Tennant's Doctor Who isn't trying to be I can't even think of a show to compare it to from that era to say it's not trying to be this other genre show, because the other genre shows were trying to be it.
Yes.
Primeval was trying to be Doctor Who. That's what was going on there. So the issue with trying to be Stranger Things or whatever is I totally understand, and I'm very sympathetic to the idea there, especially with the visual regard. But you're kind of fighting, you're fighting your own budget, and you're also fighting, what the show has proven it can be good at if you're trying to do that sort of thing, is basically my issue. I've got nothing against the show trying to change, but it's difficult. And if you're spending so much energy trying to make it visually look amazing, I would hope, especially with two, big producers in Chibnall and Stevens, that more of that energy was going to these character arcs that we find increasingly hard to map, for all they were talked up of being, big and sequenced and emotional before the series began.
I think what you're talking about comes out in the tone of this episode as well, because there is such this focus visually on getting stuff to look, I guess, kind of dour, kind of serious, kind of bleak, kind of realism, quote unquote, and it cuts against the stuff that even the script is doing. Like, you have ridiculous scenes in the script, like the woman who puts a hammer in that other woman's car. You have the guy throwing salad at Tim Shaw, and even just the character of Carl. All of these things in the script that seems like they're really crying out to be, I guess, silly or zany or like bouncy or ridiculous, but they're shot in a way that makes them look like they're meant to be dead serious and almost mournful, and it doesn't work at all. I think it was just like you say, like there's the lack of a real coherent point of view about tone and how to have Doctor Who actually carve out its own tone among the TV landscape. I think it just hurt the show a lot. I think they were just trying to get it to look in this really abstract sense, make it look good. And the result was that it just doesn't really have much of a soul, I guess.
Yeah, man, we just savaged the show.
It's been long enough. We can judge it now. Okay, we don't have to wait any longer to judge it.
The big thing I want to talk about is, well, it's kind of on this note of the tonal issues, and again, it's like the very villain of the episode is so silly, like Zim Shah. We have all the jokes about his name and everything, and his look is one of the things I'm genuinely not sure if this was meant to be kind of, throwing a bone to us guys saying, Doctor Who is Doctor Who. It doesn't need to look, like Stranger Things. Is Zim Shah meant to look kind of like he would have fit in the earlier eras of the show? Or is he meant to look super like, is he meant to look like Vecna? And is he meant to look like incredible, like the Night King or whatever? I actually can't tell what they were going for there.
It's tricky. I think there is something ridiculous about the whole teeth face, and there's really something Sarah Jane Adventures about him. We did brought this up in 2018 when we discussed this originally. Yeah. But at the same time, his whole bodysuit, the kind of like tactical look of his bodysuit, kind of like MCU kind of look, and the fact that his teeth face when it's revealed, rather than it being some crazy like shape, it's almost uniform. It just looks like a texture, like a marbled kind of skin texture. Like it's not as crazy looking as it could be. So even the inherently ridiculous premise of a guy with face full of teeth somehow gets smoothed out into a tone where he just kind of looks sort of in between. Like nominally it's a zany Doctor Who thing, but also visually it doesn't quite get there. You see what I mean?
Yeah. So the business with him is like, so he's killing like not very nice people left, right, and center, and that's the weird tonal thing for me. Is like I'm laughing at Zim Shah because look, he's so silly. How the Doctor's teasing him, and he looks like I'm neutral on his look. Like I think this look would have fit in past eras where the show visually was maybe a bit ropier in some senses, but also like you're saying, he's in a tactical suit, so I guess he looks kind of serious. So that's all fine. But how the episode ends is, well, it gets pretty dark. We have a death of not, just a nice old granddad or whatever, or, poor Raoul. We have the death of beloved Grace, who's kind of been built up as an endearing character in the episode. This is hardcore. This is, starting the era off with a big death, which, has huge reverberations on two of our leads, Ryan and Graham. Huge reverberations. I remember a big complaint with the Wheel of Time show was it kind of shifted some book ideas around, and it had a character super important to one of the main characters die in the first episode. And people's issues with that were going, so you're going to do all the adventures in the first book after this episode, fine. But this character has just had a super impactful, grief-inducing death of a loved one happen to them. How the hell can this character go through the rest of the adventures of book one if he's just lost someone crazily important to him in a super gory way? And people have different opinions on how that was handled through the rest of that show. But here, it's like, so we're starting off our zany, happy-go-lucky Doctor Who series with the death of Grace in a like, even the mechanics of her death, I'm like, that's a brutal way to go. Like, wasn't even really necessary. Am I understanding the mechanics right? Like, why did she die exactly?
Well, the thing is, you might not actually notice this on screen. In the script, the thing is, like, obviously falling, like, hurt, but the real thing that actually killed her was getting zapped by the gathering core, whatever. You can see, like, for 2 frames, there's a lightning bolt that hits her that causes her to fall off. But, like, visually, if you're just watching it the first time, you probably just think, okay, she fell hard and she died from falling. Like, she fell to earth. It's in the title. So, like, that's more or less it. It's both of those things.
Yeah. So her dying, like, I'm not against, well, I was going to say I'm not against this on principle. I kind of am. I actually am. I am against sticking a character like that in, you know, the fridge, so to speak, for very little reason. And then I don't like how it's handled through the rest of the show. I can't really put a gloss on this. I think it's awful. I think she dies for very little reason, and it's to motivate these 2 male characters. And then it's treated so spottily, like the Wheel of Time equivalent thing I was bringing up there. It's like kind of the same thing of, so is this character going to be able to have all the happy-go-lucky adventures now that Grace has died for them?
And he is.
And not speaking of how Wheel handled it, because that's its own conversation, but here, Ryan is, you know, Call of Duty man, you know, next episode. Like, of course they have moments where Grace comes up a lot, but still, like, that's a super brutal death to happen for kind of little reason, even within the mechanics of the own episode. Like, it's really, really sad. And I know we have the funeral scene and everything, but it's like, why the hell is this era so sad, but it's trying to be so happy and it's like acting so happy? I get whiplash tonally with what's going on here, and it makes me upset. I think this was a nice, you know, joyful character, and dying to motivate our 2 men is just so... It's not like just me like having an issue with fridging in general. It's that there was so much talk before the show about representation and bringing it into, you know, 2018, and, you know, there's so much kind of patting on the back of, look at what we're doing now, we're going to be so inclusive and everything, and you know, that's totally fine, but you're congratulating yourself so much, and then you're doing like a textbook case of fridging in your first episode. It's like you're kind of begging to be ridiculed. I think, honestly, with how they're doing it. The direction is confusing, like Gig was saying, you know, consulting the script of how it worked. The whole pacing of that sequence is bizarre. And it's just, it's a huge bummer. Like, you're killing off a nice character at the start to motivate your men, and you're patting yourself on the back for all how progressive you're being, you know, supposedly now. So it sucks from those perspectives. And I think it's also just cheap drama. And yeah, I just kind of really hate all that.
It's cheap drama that you know, nothing is made of. Because like you say, the Ryan and Graham are able to just move on really, really quickly, and they get like a tiny little bit of grief in It Takes You Away. And that's it. And my issue with that, based on previous Doctor, because this is not a Doctor Who thing, and I know that we all know this, so I know I'm preaching to the choir, but it's not a Doctor Who thing to a character dies and then everybody moves on. At least in the new show, I think you know, you think of like Jackie Tyler and stuff. You think of what Russell T Davies would have done with, and all of the times where Rose is even remotely in danger and Jackie hears about it, she's slapping the Doctor in the face and she's screaming at him. And I try to think of how would my issue in 2018 with this was, I was wondering how would a better writer, somebody who actually cared about what they were writing, have dealt with this. And surely one of the 2, if not both of them, Ryan and Graham, would have been frustrated at the very least and furious at most with the Doctor, because it was her plan that led to this death. And so dramatically, that could have been quite an interesting way to go down, even if it's like a silent anger that eventually gets vented out. I know that, you know, they didn't seem to want to do an arc, but if you didn't want to do an arc story, why have a dramatic beat as important to 2 of the main characters as this?
So are you suggesting like a kind of Tegan or Turlough thing of like a companion resenting the Doctor for fucking something up so badly?
In a sense, yeah, I kind of did. I did expect that from the way that Graham was in that first episode. I remember wondering, is there going to be a whole thing between 13 and Graham where he kind of secretly, maybe despite himself, maybe he's upset with himself, where he secretly holds a little bit of resentment towards the Doctor. Maybe something's going to happen there, where because in a sense it is the Doctor's fault. And I think in real life, I know this is not real life, I know it's fiction, but in real life, for something like this to happen, I think it's quite a human response.
Yeah.
Maybe that's where it's coming from, because I think that to write a character as a human, you want them to have human responses, and I think the most human response to this is it's the Doctor's fault.
Yeah, I think like Chibnall went on autopilot in terms of he just wanted an excuse to write the characters being bereaved because that's quote unquote sad, tear-jerking, whatever. And I think taking it as far as you're suggesting with actual, motivations, responses, reactions, conflict,
consequences,
consequences is not something he ever had any interest in. I mean, even in It Takes You Away, when this all gets brought up again and Ghost Grace turns up, like ultimately there's never any real conflict or danger of Graham going with Ghost Grace. Like no conflict ever emerges from this. It's just like the fact, oh, you aren't real, I reject you. So it's it never actually goes anywhere, and you get that bit where Ryan and Graham are like, oh, we're saying her name, Grace, as a tribute to her because you killed her, fuck you, now go in your stasis pod for eternity. Like that all happens, but it's so superficial.
I feel like I can envision a much more interesting dynamic and friction here if like maybe Graham and Ryan or both of them dive into the adventuring from like a Jimmy McGill thing of I've got to distract myself, I refuse to process any of this grief, I need to throw myself into something else right away. And then we've got Yaz adoring the Doctor over here, and then we've got tensions with them, that the Ryan and or Graham could be like throwing themselves into the adventures and getting annoyed at Yaz lionizing the Doctor so much and sometimes being like, well, she's not all that great, and then you've got conflict and more stuff between Yaz and the boys. In the finale, Graham does kind of remember all this Zimshar stuff, but he doesn't seem specifically incensed at the Doctor about it. He's just kind of, Doc, I'm going to do it. I'm going to shoot him. He's not like it's your fault that I have to do this in the first place. He's just, hey, I'm a man. I've got to do the shooting. And of course he doesn't in the end. And you're the best person I ever know, Graham. Oh, hi, Yaz. Is kind of how the Doctor handles that. Yeah, I feel like it's so easy to spitball. Like
a better version of Chibnall Doctor Who.
At least more activity between the characters. We've had 10 series of Doctor Who. We've had more even training us to kind of, well, this is how a TARDIS team dynamic can work, because it's especially with these ones who do kind of all have a setup where you can see how they'd connect to each other interestingly. And even this series itself is kind of interested in pairing Yaz and Ryan romantically at first. And the Rosa episode is some remnants of that. I'm totally fine with that not happening. I had no attachment to that, but it just kind of speaks to, there's some weird vestigial stuff in Series 11 from just all the avenues they choose to not do rather than do, I suppose.
I know that Chibnall is capable of doing characters holding grudges against each other, because that, to come back to the Torchwood thing, that's a big, in fact, a huge thing about the conflicts in Torchwood as a drama is what they're all keeping in, what they're secretly harbouring resentment towards each other, and occasionally it will come out in the finales or in various different moments. I know that RTD picked up on that for season 4 of Torchwood. That was something that he was doing there.
Yeah,
that was a huge part of Torchwood, was grudges and resentment. So it doesn't make sense to me that this is not something that he chose to do.
Again, it's incuriosity, isn't it? Like, there's no curiosity in the characters nursing things or having things they keep hidden to much of an extent, because the show's supposed to be about hope and happiness and joy, which is why we're going to kill off a beloved character and spend the last 5 to 10 minutes wallowing in grief at her death in the very first episode. Like, so delightful. I really want to keep watching this, guys.
Well, I guess our entry point into the next thing can be the music. And so I'm with Tyler here. I will defend Sagan against a lot of people in that I like his general atmospheric soundscapey stuff. I listen to it sometimes as I, do some work or whatever. I think it's nice music. It sounds interesting. So I like his kind of bubbling Series 11 music. I don't always think it aligns great with the actual scenes it's in, which is why I listen to the score independently of the show. But, that's, in general, what we're kind of saying a lot here is there's a weird tonal confusion in this series, is the issue there. And on that note, so a lot of the music in this episode is the stuff I like, which is like that kind of bubbling synthy stuff. It's kind of reserved. It's certainly not like Murray Gold's bombast or anything. But then it's almost like Sagan is saying, so you think I'm not bombastic? Is that what you're thinking? Then we get this screaming, how can I even describe it? This very, very commanding, these are the big emotions, music we have when 13 picks out her clothes and when 13 builds her Sonic. So that's like 13's theme, not the theme tune, but like her individual Doctor theme. The same way as like Capaldi had like a Hans Zimmerish one. She's got this really, really inspiring, I guess, is the idea. It feels like kind of didactic to me. Like, I know a lot of people, I love Murray Gold's music, and a lot of people disconnect with it because they're like, this is telling me how to feel too much. And he is very loud with a lot of what he's doing, so I understand that. And I kind of had that experience here where I'm like, Sagan, I really like your atmospheric stuff, but holy shit. I feel like, in Back to the Future when Marty plays the guitar plugged into the big amp and he's like thrown back by how aggressive the music is, how loud it's coming out of the amplifier. That's what I felt like in the Sonic sequence. That whole sequence is like overwhelming in a comparatively sedate episode. And it's not just the music, it's also just everything going on there. So I can build a Sonic. Also, I've regenerated. I'm going to explain that to the audience now. And the show's changed. I'm going to explain that too, which is fine. Doctors have speeches like that. Matt Smith got a very beloved one in the 11th hour. But yeah, that's an electrifying sequence one way or another. What did you guys think of the Sonic building sequence, musically or otherwise?
I think the word that comes to mind is self-congratulatory. I think the just the overbearing, like something from an advert for a bank. There's just this weird sense of, like, I think where like the other obvious big Doctor theme that's very overbearing would be 11th Doctor's one, I Am the Doctor.
Yes,
I think whereas that one, I think there are dimensions to that theme in a certain way. Like, yes, it is kind of optimistic, plucky, adventurous, exciting, but I think it's also got. I think it's got complications, it's got mischief, it's got kind of almost suspense to it in places. I think it's more complex, whereas this one's just a do. It's played so many times, it's just like thudding you over the head with the whole Pillar of Hope ethos.
Sagan, he works better for me in Series 12 because he starts mixing his themes more and in more subtle ways. Like the Timeless Children is all those sections where we like mixing the Time Lord theme with the 13's theme or the Ghost Monument TARDIS theme and all stuff like that. I think that works better when he treats his super bombastic themes with like restraint and stuff like that. It works better for me is what I'm saying. I enjoy them more in that way. But here it's just like, oh wait, actually I'm a huge hypocrite because I absolutely love how bombastic the Master theme is in Spyfall. That tickles me. I love that. But it's a very different sort of music. That's a very, minor key, very, I don't know. It's exciting to me in how evil it is.
It's camp evil, isn't it?
Yeah, it's camp. This, I just feel like I guess my issue with it is also, it's kind of clicking into the stuff I dislike with the episode's tone. And it's like the Pillar of Hope Chibnall speech in musical form. Basically, this is so great. And, she's so awesome. And that's what we're doing now. We're all loving the Doctor. Look at what she's doing. It's so cool. And it's a little, I like I'm the Doctor, but it's those sort of moments where I'm like, oh, that's what pissed people off. Now I get it. They felt that way I do now with that music. So although I don't think the music is all interchangeable, like I think the reason that like the Capaldi's theme, the reason that doesn't wear on me is because it's very dynamic. It changes a lot. It's not just, it's not didactic at any point as much as this music is, and it also has so many more, variations to how it plays. And it's a longer theme in general. There's more different areas that it goes to. So yeah, I don't like 13's theme because it's very, very loud and It's very, very of a tone, which I find weird in this era in general. And it just kind of blows me back with how intense it's being of this super positive tone. Yeah.
But you did like when they played the main Doctor Who theme when she first landed in the train, right?
Yes. I thought...
Oh, I love that.
Well, it felt novel. It's not, the show doesn't really do stuff like that normally. And, a fun idea to have the Doctor Who theme play for the actual Doctor. I thought, whoa, we're going to get kind of more experimental than usual with how we use the music this era. Not really. It was kind of a one-off thing.
They never did it again.
Well, the Timeless Children, they did it again.
Oh, God, they didn't. Oh, fuck.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
So, that's a bit of fun. Yeah, I did like that in this episode.
I've always had an affinity for Akunola. I do quite like his music. I agree with you that, it doesn't, a lot of the time it doesn't slot into, it kind of feels like, is he watching the same scene? Is he even watching the scene he's composing for at all? Sometimes it is a bit grating. I don't like 13's theme either. However, I do think it fits Jodie Whittaker's Doctor very well.
I would agree.
In that I find her grating and that I find this theme grating. I do actually think that there was probably a lot of thought put into this, and it is a piece of music that fits what he was trying to achieve. So he achieved it. I just don't like the way that it's done. However, I do really like the bigger, more bombastic pieces that he uses. There's one in It Takes You Away I really love and listen to that quite frequently.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
Yep, there's one in... there's a couple of in The Timeless Child. There's one in that episode with that, that sequence of like the cartoony stars and moon. And I only watched it once. I can't remember what episode it's in season 12 or... Yeah. There are a few moments of his more kind of, he clearly has put a bit more effort into this than usual music that I do quite like. But yeah, he doesn't hold a candle to Murray Gold, obviously.
Yeah, I think he's an asset to the era. But yeah, it's when the era is making a weird choice, he's going to reflect that choice. And so when the era's got this super glorifying to the point of like, this Doctor is characterized like in a sickly sweet way to me. Like when you eat too much sugar and it's just like, this is too, it's so sweet that it actually becomes unappealing. The Doctor, to a discredit, is characterized in that way in this episode and in this era in general for me, where I think Jodie could play this more interesting, and I think occasionally the character is characterized more interestingly, and then it's quickly forgotten about, basically, as we go back to she's amazing and the characters all love her and you should love her too. And so Sagan ably puts that into musical form, and so it's not just like his music in a vacuum I have an issue with, it's with that direction in general, which is, realizing just fine in the musical way.
I wanted to mention how much like the David Tennant's first episode and Matt Smith's first episode is present in this episode. It's not it doesn't feel like an homage. It sort of more feels like he's rewatched the episodes and he's drawn out what he thinks a Doctor Who premiere probably should do at certain points. Do you know what I mean? There's that scene of the 13th Doctor sort of spitting out a bit of regeneration energy, and that's what David Tennant did once. And there's a whole thing with that whole thing where she's on the crane with Tin Shah, and she's kind of talking to him in the way that it's a very similar sort of monologue to 11. I think she also gets a sort of quirky, why did she just say that thing, a bit like Who the Man? And then there was another thing we actually mentioned earlier that I thought, oh yeah, that happened in Christmas Invasion as well. There were a few things that I think, rather than echoing bits of Doctor Who that have happened before, every time I kind of see a comparison, I sort of think, oh right, so he's rewatched an episode, and it's just in his brain that, and I think, Gig, you could probably explain this better than me, because I think this is something that you ingrained into my head in a podcast years ago, where you said something about how what Chibnall does is he doesn't write references to other episodes. He kind of has an idea of what Doctor Who should be, and that's what goes into his scripts. And I think that's exactly what happens every time he rewatches an old episode. It kind of ends up like, oh right, so Doctor Who ought to be something like this, and it just kind of feels like a rehashing of the same idea again, again, and again, and again. And The Woman Who Fell to Earth is no different from any other episode that kind of feels like other Doctor Who episodes.
Yeah, he hits all the beats, so to speak. Like there's like a checklist, a set of tick boxes.
A checklist. Yeah, that's a good word.
Okay, these are the things that go in the Doctor's first episode. You have to have her falling unconscious. You have to have her doing some shit. She has to have a big speech at the climax where she asserts to herself that she is the Doctor. But at the same time in this episode, because he's also checked the other box, which is that she has amnesia, which has happened sometimes, although not all the time. That ends up like converging with the identity asserting speech thing, which is that at the climax she remembers who she is, and for the whole period of time leading up to that, it's just kind of treading water, kind of spinning on wheels. It leads to a really quite hollow set of exercises, and he does that a lot over his era. Like just lots of really quite boring, just rehashing.
I don't want to speak heresy here, but I feel like these building blocks of like Doctor premiere episodes aren't that good. Like I think amnesiac main character needs to have a big sleep. Like all that stuff, I feel like that's not a great building block of drama. It's why I tend to be quite bored by like the Christmas invasion, or that kind of thing where it's kind of the demands of having a new Doctor having to have a big sleep and not remember who they are and be out of sorts for the whole episode. It's kind of like we're pushing our premiere to the next episode in terms of actually getting stuff going, and we're putting our main character out of action for lots of the episode. It's like, is this worth keeping? Like my favorite premieres of the new series are really pacey ones, very witty ones that are quick and they don't let up, and they're very focused on very quickly establishing, all the basic stuff to do with the companion's life. The pilot and Smith and Jones especially, I think, are really good at that. I know they're not Doctor premieres, but they're still, they're introducing the Doctor. Like they could be approached as premieres because they're about setting Martha up and about setting Bill up. And Rose, which, is basically the same thing. The Rose doesn't get deep into who this new Doctor is or isn't. It saves that for Dalek, especially in that same series, and the end of the world to an extent. It's very interested in very quickly setting up, this is Rose, this is the Power State, this is Jackie, this is Mickey, this is everything going on, these are the tensions in her life, this is who she is, let's go bam, bam, bam with this plot about autons and everything. It's quite pacey in that sense, which is why I think it's, such a great episode, because it's not doing... Christopher Eccleston needs a big nap, and he's not sure what he's doing yet. I know it's stuff old episodes have done, but if stuff old episodes has done isn't great, you don't need to do it. Like patterning after Spearhead makes sense because that was really effective as an episode. But I feel like some of the tropes of, new Doctor episodes are like, do we need these around still? Like, I'm not sure they're, I know fans can go, oh, that's happened before. How sweet. But yeah, when David Tennant, or Jodie Whittaker here are taking a sleep, I'm feeling like, give me a break. Like, is this... I think RTD, you're better than this, and Chibnall, you're better than this, is what I'm thinking in some of the scenes in those episodes.
I think part of why 11th Hour is so beloved is that it's supposed to be a regeneration episode, but it does the opposite of that. Rather than putting the Doctor on the bench, or having them be amnesiac, or having them be asleep, the Doctor is not only is Matt Smith at the forefront of that episode, but throughout it, we see all the different sides of him. We see him interacting with the child at the start and how he's in such a different mode. We see him going energizing, full tilt, save the world mode later on. We see him interacting with Amy, with Rory. We see how he bounces off all of them, even with random strangers. He is like completely at the forefront. We're seeing all different sides of his performance, his character. It's so exciting, it's so fun, right? And I think like stuff like the structures Chibnall uses for this episode kind of stop us doing that. And also at the same time, like 13 feels kind of like one note all the way through it. She's doing that forced, oh my god, we've got to do like this and blah blah blah. And she feels almost the same way at the end as she does when she first appears. So it's like it's boring.
Yeah, I don't like the Christmas invasion that much. I haven't watched it in years. Who knows what I think of it now. But I will say, David Tennant does change over it. Like, he gets all his confidence at the end with his, zany speech in the Sycorax ship. Of course, Matt Smith has a very clearly, delineated arc across the 11th Hour. He changes his performance as he goes. That's done very well. Yeah, that's kind of an interesting thing with the Doctor's first episode, is like the actor trying out different stuff and, then settling on the thing they're going to mainly do. Yeah, but here you're right. Like, she's quirky and energetic and a little bit sympathetic to others in the train scene. And then she is the rest of the episode, and the rest, in general, that's what she's doing.
She gets a bit annoyed at Tim Shaw, and that's about it.
Yeah.
So 13 doesn't change from beginning to end of episode, which is really interesting because there's a whole thing about 13 not remembering who she is, who Doctor Who is, and what they do. And there's a really cool line, actually, that I picked up on this time. She says, "I'm not yet who I am," which I think is a little reference to a Shakespeare line from Othello and Twelfth Night. I am not who I am. You have Iago saying that in Othello, and you have Viola Cesario saying that in Twelfth Night. And Twelfth Night more interesting here, actually, because Viola Cesario is a cross-dressing character, a character who is a female presenting as a male, and then goes back to female at the end. So obviously here with Doctor Who, there are some, I'm sure I don't really need to go into that. So I find that quite interesting. Interesting in the sense, in quite a superficial sense, because it's sure Chibnall's doing it, so it's interesting that you're doing a little Shakespeare reference. That's nice, but it's not going anywhere because I'm not getting anything from 13 as Iago, and I'm not getting anything from 13 as Viola really beyond they've become a different gender.
What's interesting there is it's kind of an open insecurity from the showrunner. We're talking about Doctor Premiere episodes. Deep Breath had the same thing, where the show, it's not quite as like to the camera as this episode does it with that speech, but the show kind of has a section which is Moffat basically going, guys, I know this is different. I know this ain't Matt Smith. I know this ain't a, handsome youth in their 20s, but it's still the same show. It's the same character. Stick around. I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. Deep Breath does a whole big thing about that. And yeah, Jodie has, I think, 2 speeches really. On the Crane, she's a similar one where she's basically saying, this is different. This is new. You're still going to like it. It's still going to be good. Still sorting out how it's all going to work, but, strap on in. It's all going to work fine. I think it's kind of interesting to see that kind of insecurity or like assurance that a show or a showrunner is trying to do there. Yeah, I think it's a little too direct, especially because there's like 2 times it happens in this episode. But yeah, the episode's certainly concerned about being a new episode, a new era, very much.
The one where she's talking to Tim Shaw and then just randomly goes on a rant about how we can all change and evolve and say true to who we are. Like literally, like it's been spliced in from another show. It's just so insanely crap. Yeah, I mean, and you compare to the equivalent in Deep Breath, where like there's a whole kind of, I guess, a conflict that Clara has, and it's rooted in character relationships and their interactions, and maybe it's a bit contrived, but it's TV at least. It's not like a public service announcement.
Yeah.
And I mentioned it at the beginning, actually. I did actually laugh at a couple of lines in this episode, which I don't think I've done really very many times in Chibnall Doctor Who. I'm trying to find my note on it. I wonder whether you guys had any moments that actually you were quite impressed with comedy-wise. Actually, this is not the one. It's an interesting one. I don't think it's not a funny line, but I don't think it's such a bad line as it was played. The whole smart boy biology thing, and I remember we mocked that before. I don't think actually written down, like if you were to write that, it's not a great line, it's not doing much, but it's not as bad, I think, as Whittaker played it. It kind of just feels really, it feels like it feels like a cosplayer trying to do a David Tennant impression rather than a doctor, rather than an actor taking a line and doing something with it. So that one was quite interesting. There's the Carl line, I think, which we all liked before, the we don't get aliens in Sheffield. I do like that, and I like the way that frames Doctor Who in Sheffield for Series 11 at least. Yeah, I can't find the line I liked, which is a shame, but I did. There was definitely a moment, and I think I told you, Neil, about it, where I actually, I think it was a 13 line.
You might be the line I like, which is where she's kind of impishly saying, she's thinking of reformatting because of whatever stuff she's talking to herself about, and she gets Ryan's phone. He's like, no, all my stuff's on there. And she's like, I formatted it, not anymore. Like, yeah. I think she's funny there. She's like nice and impish and mischievous in that moment. It's probably more fun for Jodie to play like an impish, mischievous doctor like that than it is to play the I'm incredible, and everyone should love me, the music loves me, Yaz loves me, look how cool I am, which, it's got to be one note for her as well. I think as us as viewers watching it, it's got to be even worse for her in some ways playing it, I assume. So the little moments of comedy that she gets, I think, are probably a joy for her, as they are, sometimes for us when they work well.
I found it. Here it is. I had to find it in messages. It was Grace saying, "Come on, love, let's get you to A&E," and 13 saying, "No, I never go anywhere that's just initials." I found that very sort of quite Stephen Moffat-y.
Yes,
so
yes.
That was the one thing from this episode that I actually really quite liked and thought was actually a kind of that there was a cohesiveness between the writer and the actor.
Yeah, it's a funny line.
Especially the TARDIS is just initials, so that's quite ironic, actually, isn't it?
That's cool. Yeah, I guess we're ending our discussion on The Woman Who Fell to Earth then. To close this out, how do you feel now, having not just watched it again, but talked about it again? How does this feel to you guys, having discussed it again these years later since we first watched it?
I hate it less. In fact, I don't hate it at all now. It's I can rewatch it with a sense of kind of like, I suppose, the way that I mentioned classic Who fans earlier, kind of in the way that maybe they will go back and watch those Sixth Doctor episodes and stuff. I don't know. I don't know. It's hard to say. I know that I don't. I feel like there are lower stakes now.
Yeah.
It kind of it's like going back and watching a low part in the show's history where I can appreciate it as it's kind of over now, and thank God for that. And I can watch it with lower stakes in mind.
Yeah, I would say my rage towards it has cooled over time, of course, and because we have an actual different future now. But what's settled into is like, it's. I still find a lot of it kind of disgusting, just in terms of how it was as a deliberate approach to remaking, one of my favourite TV shows. I still find just everything it was going for pretty repellent. But whereas the later Chib stuff I often look at with kind of pity or disdain just because of how much of a mess and a clusterfuck it is. In this case, like that, I feel like this is an episode you can at least confront on its own terms and look at and think, okay, yeah, I don't like what it's doing here. It was an attempt, it's over, I think it was a mess, and I would like to just put it behind me.
Yeah. The main thing for me was just that in 2018, a lot of the stuff we were feeling about this episode and about the era in general was kind of very much a minority thing, or people thinking we were making too much of stuff, or like seeing things that weren't there. And that's all completely gone by now, where there's like a mass of people saying stuff, we've been saying since, the Comic-Con in 2018, basically. And so it's different retrospectively looking back on it and being like, a lot of stuff I was uncomfortable with this first episode bore out to continue being uncomfortable and made other people uncomfortable as well. I went back and I read a lot of contemporary reviews of this episode, and so it was kind of cathartic. I wish the aspects that troubled me with this episode and this era weren't there at all, of course, but it is kind of cathartic to...
You feel a bit vindicated.
Yeah. So I have that element of, people tell me I'm making too much of Grace's death or whatever, and that, stop, it's not a big deal. They're going to do blah, blah, blah. It's just a first episode. It's okay.
Too early to judge.
Yeah, exactly. And now that's all gone. And so looking at the episode again, it feels much more relaxing because it's in the rear view mirror now. Like Tyler was saying, it's like a retrospective thing now. And so, for the good stuff and the bad stuff, it's not an area of active debate the way, contemporary incumbent Doctor episodes are. And so it's very different to look at it now. Yeah.
And at the same time, within this episode, and the way that, despite supposedly making the Doctor accessible or relatable or whatever, the way it's still kind of fetishizing the Doctor and how wonderful and special she is, in that, you can see the trajectory of where Chib would later go with the Timeless Children and making the Doctor into, the most important organism in the entire fucking universe. It's all there, albeit some of it subtextually, but like just the train wreck that we were in for is hinted at in some really key ways. So I think it's really useful to go back to Series 11 and just revisit it, like in the light of history. I think it's quite useful.
Indeed, and that wraps us up for now. Everyone listening, what do you think of the Series 11 premiere? What did you think of it back when you first saw it? What do you think of it now, if your opinions have changed? Any thoughts on what we had to say about it this time as well? Let us all know. Of course, we always read what do you have to say, and thank you very much for listening, as always. Cheers.